Jeremy Vine has never been in a fight, not a real one, not even close. For 30 years he's been the face of middle-class British liberalism, the BBC presenter who cycles to work, who tweets about inconsiderate drivers, who hosts polite radio debates about social issues from the safety of a London studio. His idea of danger is a white van getting too close on his morning commute, until April 2024, when he invited Conor McGregor onto his BBC Two show and attempted to lecture him about toxic masculinity in combat sports. What happened next wasn't a debate, it was a masterclass in the difference between talking about danger and living it, and it was absolutely hilarious. Picture this. Jeremy Vine, 60 years old, 5'9", maybe 150 pounds soaking wet, famous for his bicycle activism and his Radio 2 call-in show where pensioners complain about potholes, versus Conor McGregor, 35, professional fighter, former two-division UFC champion, a man who's been punched in the face by the best fighters on the planet and punched back harder. The physical contrast alone was comedy, but the intellectual mismatch was even better, because Vine, bless him, genuinely believed he could lecture Conor about masculinity, about violence, about what's acceptable in modern society. He'd clearly prepared his talking points about toxic masculinity, about glorifying violence, about role models for young men. What he hadn't prepared for was Conor asking him one simple question that would expose the entire absurdity of the conversation. Jeremy, have you ever been in actual danger? Real danger, not a bicycle lane dispute, real physical danger where you could get seriously hurt. The silence that followed was so awkward, so perfect, that even the BBC crew were trying not to laugh. This is that story. The BBC Two studio was standard Vine fare. Casual setup, two chairs at slight angles, very let's have a chat over coffee aesthetic. Vine wore his usual uniform, smart casual, button-down shirt, glasses, the look of a man who'd never had a physical confrontation in his life but had very strong opinions about those who did. Conor arrived in dark jeans, a fitted black t-shirt, leather jacket over his arm, the look of someone who didn't need a suit to command respect. The contrast was immediate and visual. Vine started with his typical preamble, speaking in that carefully modulated BBC voice. "Conor, thanks for coming on. I want to talk about something serious today. Combat sports, MMA specifically, and what message they send to young men about violence, about masculinity, about how to solve problems." Conor nodded politely, a small smile already forming. He knew exactly where this was going. "There's a growing concern," Vine continued, warming to his topic, "that sports like yours glorify violence, that they present fighting as entertainment, that they normalize aggression, that they promote what many of us would call toxic masculinity. The idea that being a man means being physically dominant, aggressive, willing to hurt others. And I wonder if you've thought about your responsibility as a role model in that context." The question hung in the air. Conor took a slow breath, clearly choosing his words carefully, but the amusement in his eyes was unmistakable. "Jeremy," he began, his Dublin accent thick and relaxed, "let me make sure I understand. You think that two trained athletes in a regulated sport with medical supervision, with rules, with weight classes, with mandatory safety protocols, competing for a prize in front of willing spectators is toxic masculinity?" Vine nodded enthusiastically. "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds reasonable. But the underlying message..." "The underlying message," Conor interrupted gently, "is that physical competition has been part of human culture since the beginning. Wrestling was in the ancient Olympics. Boxing has existed for thousands of years. Men and women have always tested themselves physically. That's not toxic, that's human nature." But Vine wasn't backing down. He'd clearly prepared for this. "But surely you can see the difference between ancient Greece and modern Britain. We've evolved. We don't need to solve problems with our fists anymore. We have laws, courts, civilized discourse." The smile on Conor's face grew wider. This was going exactly where he'd expected.
Conor leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "Jeremy, can I ask you something personal?" Vine looked uncertain but nodded. "Of course. You cycle to work, right? famous for it. You tweet about it regularly, you wear a helmet camera, you post videos of drivers who get too close to you. Yes, Vine said, clearly wondering where this was going. I'm an advocate for cyclist safety. It's important. Right, Conor agreed. And you do that because cycling in London is dangerous. Cars, buses, taxis, they don't always see you, they pass too close, you could get hit. It's a real risk. Vine nodded more enthusiastically now, on familiar ground. Exactly. That's why I campaign for better cycling infrastructure, for driver awareness, for... So you willingly put yourself in danger every day, Conor interrupted, by cycling through London traffic. You know the risks. You've documented them extensively on social media, but you do it anyway. Vine's expression changed slightly. He was starting to sense the trap. That's different. Is it? Conor's tone remained friendly, but the point was sharpening. You choose to cycle through one of the most dangerous traffic systems in the world. You film it, you tweet about it, you use it to build your public profile as a cycling advocate. You're literally making a brand out of voluntary risk-taking. But when I choose to step into a cage with another trained fighter, suddenly that's toxic masculinity. The studio had gone very quiet. Vine was visibly trying to find the distinction. But I'm cycling for transport, for health, for environmental reasons, he protested. And I'm fighting for sport, for competition, for testing myself against the best in the world, Conor countered. We're both choosing to do dangerous things because we value something more than the risk. The only difference is you think your reasons are noble and mine are toxic. Why? Because yours involves a bicycle and mine involves fists? Vine was floundering now. It's not the same. Fighting is inherently about hurting someone else. So is cycling, apparently, Conor said, and now there was a definite edge of humor in his voice. Based on your Twitter feed, you're constantly in conflict with drivers. You post angry videos, you call them out, you campaign for stricter penalties. You're fighting a culture war against motorists. The only difference is you're doing it from the moral high ground of environmental consciousness. But it's still aggression, Jeremy. It's still you versus them. It's just socially acceptable aggression. The comparison was absurd and brilliant. Several crew members were visibly trying not to smile. Vine tried to regain control. But the difference is I'm not promoting violence as entertainment. Are you sure? Conor challenged. Because you post videos of near misses with cars. You document dangerous driving. People watch those videos for the drama, for the conflict, for the adrenaline of seeing how close you came to being hit. That's entertainment, Jeremy. You're monetizing danger just like I am. The only difference is mine is honest about what it is. Vine's face was reddening. I'm trying to improve road safety. And I'm trying to be the best fighter in the world, Conor said. We both have goals that involve risk, but you've decided yours is virtuous and mine is toxic because yours involves a bicycle and mine involves a cage. That's not morality, Jeremy. That's just middle-class British snobbery dressed up as social commentary. The phrase middle-class British snobbery hit like a punch. Vine actually recoiled slightly. That's completely unfair. Is it? Conor pressed forward. Let me ask you again. Have you ever been in real danger? Not a car passed too close danger. Real physical danger where you thought you might get seriously hurt. Vine hesitated. His eyes darted to the side. The silence extended. I've had some close calls on the bike, he said, finally, weakly. Close calls, Conor repeated. Right. Let me tell you what danger is, Jeremy. Danger is stepping into a cage with a man who's trained his entire life to hurt you, who can knock you unconscious with a single punch, who can break your arm, choke you out, kick your leg so hard you can't walk for a week. Danger is feeling your nose break, tasting your own blood, hearing your corner scream instructions while your vision's blurred and your head's ringing, and you've got 2 minutes to figure out how to not just survive, but win. Danger is knowing that one mistake, one moment of weakness, one wrong move, and you lose everything in front of millions of people. That's danger, Jeremy, not a fucking bicycle lane. The profanity wasn't aggressive, it was matter of fact, and it landed perfectly. Vine looked like he'd been slapped. The studio was frozen. But here's the thing, Conor continued, his voice calmer now. I choose that danger. I understand it. I prepare for it. I respect it. And when it's over, I shake my opponent's hand because we both survived something real together. That's not toxic masculinity, Jeremy. That's two human beings testing their limits with mutual respect. What's toxic is you sitting in your safe BBC studio, having never experienced violence, never tested yourself physically, lecturing me about what messages I'm sending. You want to talk about toxic masculinity? How about the arrogance of thinking you understand violence when you've never experienced it?
Vine tried desperately to pivot. But I'm talking about the message to young men, about role models, about what boys see when they watch you fight. Right, Carla said. Let's talk about that. What exactly do you think boys see when they watch me fight? Vine launched into what was clearly a prepared speech. They see violence being rewarded. They see aggression being celebrated. They see someone getting rich and famous by hurting people. And the concern is that normalizes violence as a solution to problems. Conor let him finish, then responded with devastating calm. You know what boys actually see when they watch me fight? They see discipline, because you can't succeed in MMA without insane discipline. Training twice a day, every day for months, strict diet, no alcohol, perfect sleep schedule. They see hard work, because talent alone isn't enough. You have to outwork everyone. They see courage, because stepping into that cage takes guts, especially when you know you might lose. They see resilience, because I've lost fights, Jeremy. I've been knocked out, and I came back. They see respect, because I respect every opponent, every coach, every training partner. And they see the consequences of violence, because when I get hit, it hurts. When I make a mistake, I pay for it immediately. They learn that violence isn't casual, isn't easy, isn't something you do without serious preparation and serious risk. The reframing was total. Everything Vine had presented as negative, Conor had turned into positive lessons. But Vine wasn't done. Surely you can't deny that some young men who watch MMA become more aggressive, more likely to get into fights. Can you prove that? Conor challenged. Show me the data, because I can show you data that young men who train in martial arts have better discipline, better conflict resolution skills, better emotional control than young men who don't. Training to fight actually makes you less likely to fight outside the gym, because you understand the consequences. You understand what real violence is. The kids who get into street fights aren't trained fighters, Jeremy. They're untrained idiots who don't understand danger. Vine looked uncomfortable, but surely you'd agree that celebrating violence, even in a controlled environment— I don't celebrate violence, Conor interrupted, his patience clearly wearing thin. I celebrate competition. I celebrate excellence. I celebrate two people pushing themselves to their absolute limits. The violence is a tool, not the goal, and if you can't understand that distinction, maybe you shouldn't be commenting on it. Conor shifted gears, and the smile returned. Jeremy, how many followers do you have on Twitter? Vine looked confused by the question. About 800,000. Why? And how often do you tweet? Daily, Vine said, sometimes multiple times a day. And what do you tweet about? Mostly cycling, some politics, social issues. Right, Conor nodded. And when you tweet about bad drivers, when you post those videos, what kind of responses do you get? Vine shifted uncomfortably. Mixed, lots of support, but also some abuse. Some people get quite aggressive. Quite aggressive, Conor repeated. Death threats? Vine looked down. Sometimes, yes. And how does that make you feel? It's unpleasant, Vine admitted, but it's part of public life now. So let me get this straight, Conor said, leaning forward. You use social media to criticize people, to call out behavior you don't like, to fight culture wars. And when people respond aggressively, you complain about online toxicity. But you're contributing to that toxicity, Jeremy. You're using your platform to attack people, to shame them, to judge them. That's aggressive behavior. It's just verbal instead of physical. Vine tried to defend himself. I'm holding people accountable, and I'm holding other fighters accountable, Conor shot back. When I fight someone, I'm testing them. I'm seeing if they're as good as they say they are. You do the same thing on Twitter. You test ideas, you challenge people, you call out hypocrisy. The only difference is I do it face to face, in a controlled environment with rules and medical staff. You do it from behind a keyboard where you never have to deal with real consequences. And you have the nerve to call me toxic. The studio was dead silent. Vine looked genuinely hurt. That's not fair, isn't it? Conor's voice was calm but relentless. You built a career on being morally superior, on judging others, on telling people how they should behave, what they should value, what's acceptable. That's aggression, Jeremy. It's psychological, social aggression. You're just as much a fighter as I am. You just fight with words instead of fists. And you've convinced yourself that makes you better, more evolved, more civilized. But it doesn't. It just makes you a fighter who's never had to face the physical consequences of fighting. The comparison was devastating because it was true. Vine's entire public persona was built on confrontation, confronting drivers, confronting social norms, confronting anyone he disagreed with. He was a fighter. He just didn't recognize it as fighting because it didn't involve physical contact.
Conor wasn't finished. He'd clearly been waiting to make this point. You know what this is really about, Jeremy? It's not about violence or masculinity or role models. It's about class. Vine's eyes widened. That's absurd. Is it? Conor challenged, because I noticed that you never criticize rugby. Rugby's incredibly violent. Men smashing into each other at full speed, broken bones, concussions, long-term brain damage. But you don't call rugby players toxic. You don't question whether rugby should exist. Why? Because rugby's a middle-class sport. It's played at public schools. It's part of British culture. But MMA? That's working class. That's immigrant communities. That's people like me from places like Crumlin finding a way to succeed without university degrees or family connections. And that makes you uncomfortable. Vine was shaking his head vigorously. I have nothing against working-class sports. Then why are we having this conversation? Conor pressed. Why aren't you questioning whether boxing should exist, whether rugby should exist, whether football, which leads to massive amounts of violence between fans, should exist? Why is it specifically MMA that you're concerned about? And don't tell me it's because MMA is more violent. We have weight classes, rounds, medical checks, referees who stop fights at the first sign of serious injury. Boxing doesn't stop until someone's unconscious or the fight's over. Rugby has no rounds, no medical timeouts. You just play until you can't anymore. But those are acceptable to you. Why? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vine had no good answer because Conor was right. The criticism of MMA had always carried a whiff of class prejudice, the idea that working-class violence was crude and unacceptable, while middle-class violence was sport and tradition. You think toxic masculinity is me fighting in a cage, Conor continued, but I think toxic masculinity is you sitting in your comfortable studio, having never been in a real fight, lecturing working-class people about their culture and their sport. That's toxic, Jeremy. The arrogance of thinking you're qualified to judge things you've never experienced. The assumption that your middle-class British values are universal truths rather than class-specific opinions. That's what's toxic. Not two fighters testing themselves in a cage. Not young men learning discipline and respect through martial arts. Your judgmental ignorance. The phrase judgmental ignorance was perfect. It captured everything that was wrong with Vine's entire argument. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Vine's expression had shifted from defensive to something more uncertain. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was quieter. I take your point about class, he said carefully, and perhaps I have been unfair in focusing specifically on MMA. Perhaps. The admission was small but significant.
But you must admit, Vine continued, trying to salvage something, that there are concerns about brain injury, about CTE, about the long-term health consequences of fighting. Absolutely, Conor agreed immediately. Those are legitimate concerns, and they should be studied, addressed, regulated. Better medical protocols, mandatory brain scans, enforced recovery periods between fights. I support all of that, because I care about fighter safety. But those are practical concerns, Jeremy. They're not moral concerns. They're not about toxic masculinity or glorifying violence. They're about how we make a dangerous sport as safe as possible while preserving what makes it meaningful. That's a very different conversation from the one you wanted to have. Vine nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe I came into this with assumptions. You came in thinking I was some mindless thug who glorifies violence, Conor said bluntly, because that's easier than engaging with the reality that MMA is a legitimate sport with real athletes who take it seriously. It's easier to dismiss us than to understand us, and that's lazy, Jeremy. You're a journalist. You're supposed to understand things before you judge them, but you didn't. You just assumed. The criticism was harsh but accurate. Vine had clearly not done his homework, had not trained with fighters, had not studied the sport beyond watching highlight reel knockouts. He'd formed his opinion based on assumptions and class prejudice. I'll admit, Vine said slowly, that I may have underestimated the discipline and skill involved. May have? Conor's eyebrows raised. Jeremy, you absolutely did. You came on here thinking you could lecture me like I'm some kid who got into too many schoolyard fights, but I'm a professional athlete at the highest level of my sport. I've trained with Olympic wrestlers, world champion boxers, jiu-jitsu black belts. I've studied nutrition, sports psychology, kinesiology. I've been tested by USADA more times than I can count. I am as much an athlete as any rugby player or footballer, more actually, because I have to be elite in multiple disciplines at once. But you didn't see any of that. You just saw violence and made a judgment. That's ignorance, Jeremy. And coming from a journalist, it's unacceptable ignorance.
Vine took his glasses off, cleaned them slowly, put them back on. It was a gesture of someone buying time to think. When he spoke again, his tone had changed completely. "You're right," he said simply. "I came into this with preconceptions. I saw the violence and I didn't look past it to see what it required, what it taught, what it meant. That's my failure as a journalist and as someone who's supposed to engage with topics fairly." The admission was unexpectedly genuine. Conor's expression softened. "I appreciate that, Jeremy. And look, I understand where you're coming from. If you don't understand fighting, if you've never trained, it does just look like violence. I get that. But that's why you should learn about it before you criticize it." Vine nodded. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course. Do you ever worry about brain damage, about CTE, about what fighting might do to you long term?" "Every single day," Conor said without hesitation. "I'm not stupid, Jeremy. I know the risks. I've seen fighters whose speech slurs, who forget things, who have tremors. I know what this sport can cost. That's why I fight smart, why I don't take unnecessary damage, why I'll retire before I'm a shell of myself. But I also know that I'm doing something I love, something I'm exceptional at, something that's given me a life I could never have imagined growing up in Crumlin. And that's worth the risk to me. Everyone makes risk calculations. You cycle through London traffic even though cyclists die every year. I fight even though fighters get hurt. We've both decided what risks we're willing to take for what we value. The difference is, I don't judge your choice and you do judge mine." Vine was quiet for a moment. "That's fair. What would you want people like me to understand about MMA?" Conor thought carefully. "That it's not about violence for its own sake. It's about testing yourself. It's about facing your fears. It's about discipline and respect and pushing past your limits. And yes, it's about fighting, but fighting, real fighting, with trained opponents and rules and safety measures, teaches you more about yourself than almost anything else. It strips away all the bullshit. In that cage, you can't hide, you can't pretend, you can't talk your way out. You have to be real, and that's valuable, Jeremy. That's something young men need. Not toxic masculinity, real challenges, real consequences, real growth. The explanation was thoughtful, articulate, the opposite of what Vine had expected from a fighter. The interview ended on surprisingly friendly terms, with Vine admitting he'd learned something and Conor encouraging him to visit a proper MMA gym to understand the sport better. But the internet had already made its judgment. Within 2 hours, Vine McGregor was trending. But unlike other Conor interviews, this one was trending with laughter. Not mean-spirited mockery, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of Jeremy Vine trying to lecture Conor McGregor about masculinity and danger. The memes were instant. Side-by-side photos of Vine on his bicycle next to Conor in the octagon, with captions like, "Choose your fighter." Vine's quote about close calls on the bike became a running joke about British understatement. One viral tweet with over 1 million likes, "Jeremy Vine, a van got close to me once. Conor McGregor, I get punched in the face for a living." This interview was comedy gold. Another, respect to Vine for admitting he was wrong. Not many British journalists have the humility to do that on air. British newspapers covered it with unusual humour. The Guardian, "When the cyclist met the fighter, a lesson in assumptions." The Times, "McGregor schools Vine on class and combat." Even the Telegraph, usually dry, ran with "Vine's bicycle versus McGregor's fists, the most British debate of 2024. But the most interesting response came from the fitness and martial arts community. Hundreds of MMA gyms across the UK reported increased interest, particularly from middle-class men who'd never considered training before. One gym owner in North London told a reporter, "We've had loads of new members saying they watched the Vine interview and realized they'd been judging MMA unfairly. They want to understand what it's actually about." The interview also sparked a broader conversation about class and sport in Britain. Why was rugby, objectively more dangerous with worse long-term health outcomes, considered respectable, while MMA was considered thuggish? Why were middle-class journalists so comfortable criticizing working-class sports without ever engaging with them seriously? Several academic papers were written about it in the months that followed. Jeremy Vine himself was remarkably gracious. He tweeted a photo of himself visiting an MMA gym in London, trying jiu-jitsu for the first time, with the caption, "Conor was right. I judged without understanding. This is hard. Respect to everyone who trains in this sport. My back will never be the same." The tweet got 600,000 likes. Conor replied, "Welcome to the world of real danger, Jeremy. Bet that's scarier than a bicycle lane." The exchange was friendly, funny, and showed both men in a good light.
What happened between Conor McGregor and Jeremy Vine on BBC Two in April 2024 was unusual, because both men came away from it looking better than they went in. Vine showed humility and willingness to admit he was wrong. Conor showed patience and articulation in explaining his sport to someone who dismissed it. But beneath the humour and the friendly resolution, the interview exposed something important about British culture, class assumptions, and how we judge things we don't understand. Jeremy Vine represented a particular type of middle-class liberalism that's very comfortable making moral judgments about working-class culture while never actually engaging with it. He'd decided MMA was toxic without training, without interviewing fighters seriously, without understanding what the sport taught or required. That's intellectual laziness dressed up as moral concern, and it's everywhere in British media. Conor's genius in that interview was showing Vine his own contradictions. You choose danger on your bike, I choose danger in the cage. Why is yours noble and mine toxic?
You fight culture wars on Twitter. I fight trained opponents in controlled environments. Why is your aggression acceptable and mine isn't? You've never been in real danger, but you lecture me about violence. Where's your expertise coming from? Each question forced Vine to confront his assumptions until he had to admit they were based on class prejudice rather than actual analysis. That moment of admission, "You're right," was significant because it happened on air, because it was genuine, because it showed that even someone as entrenched in their worldview as Jeremy Vine could learn if confronted with logic and facts. The lesson here isn't that Jeremy Vine is a bad person or even a bad journalist. It's that we all make assumptions about things we don't understand, and those assumptions are often based on class, culture, familiarity. Middle-class people find rugby familiar, so they don't question it. They find MMA unfamiliar, so they assume it's problematic. That's human nature. But when you're a journalist with a platform, when you're using that platform to criticize and judge, you have a responsibility to go beyond your assumptions, to actually learn, to actually engage, to actually understand before you condemn. Vine failed that responsibility initially, but he redeemed himself by admitting it. And Conor, the fighter from Crumlin, who could have been dismissive and aggressive, chose instead to educate, to explain, to bridge the gap. That's not toxic masculinity, that's the opposite. That's strength used for understanding rather than domination. This interview was funny. It produced great memes, but it was also a genuine moment of cross-class communication, of someone from one world helping someone from another world understand it. And in modern Britain, where class divides are often wider than anyone wants to admit, that's valuable, maybe even necessary. Jeremy Vine got on his bicycle and rode home that day having learned something real. And Conor McGregor proved once again that the most dangerous thing about him isn't his fists, it's his ability to dismantle your arguments so thoroughly that you have no choice but to agree with him, even when you really, really didn't want to.